My name is Monica Wilkinson Kelly. I'm the archivist at the Edith B. Ford Memorial Library in Auburn, New York. This interview is being conducted as part of the Cayuga and Seneca Lakes Agriculture and Craft Beverage Memory Project. Today is October 22nd, 2020, and I am interviewing Bruce Murray of Boundary Breaks. Good morning, Bruce.
Hi, Monica. Glad to be with you this morning.
So can you tell me your full name and the name of your vineyard and where you are located?
My full name is Bruce Murray, and we are located here at Boundary Breaks Vineyard at 1568 Porter Covert Road in Lodi. We are on the eastern side of Seneca Lake, just north of Lodi Point State Park, down by the water, where we have our vineyard and also where my wife, Diana, and I live right here on the property.
And where are you from originally?
So my original home, I really was raised in Syracuse, New York, which is about an hour and 20 minutes from here. But prior to that, my family had moved around. I was actually born in Canada in 1955, so that makes me about 65, almost 65 years old now.
And can you talk about your education? Did you have any prior experience in agriculture?
So my family on my father's side were very deeply involved in agriculture in Iowa, actually. Both my parents came from Iowa. My grandfather was a professor of agricultural economics at Iowa State University. And there's always been a history of agriculture in that part of the family. My dad worked on farms in Iowa as a kid and always spoke very, I think, fondly about that kind of work, that kind of life. But myself, I grew up in Syracuse, went away to school, left home when I was 18 to go off to college, and really had never come back except to visit. And I lived in California initially, then I ended up moving back to New York City in the mid-'80s and began working in first the newspaper industry in New York City, and then in I would say the tech business in the late 90s and early 2000s. So the short answer is no. Until we started here at Boundary Breaks in 2008, I had no background in agriculture.
So why did you make this career move?
Well, I'd made several career moves in my professional life previously, so I was accustomed to having to look at what the next chapter might be. And I was at an age in my early 50s at the time when I thought this could be something, if it were to work out, I could do for quite a long time. My family tends to be very active late into their lives, and so I am anticipating that when I'm in my 80s, I will still be doing this. And this is the kind of thing, if you set it up early enough in your life, that you can actually have a productive experience late into life.
And so, again, what was the date that you purchased the land here?
So we purchased this property from the Covert family in March of 2008. There were no vines here. It was a farm that had been in that family since the 1860s. It's a fairly old family in this area, and the descendants of the last member of the Covert family that was involved just weren't going to be farmers any longer, at least not on this property. So we were very fortunate to find it, and because it's ideal as a vineyard site, because it's on this side of the lake, it's close to the water, it's on a slope, all the things you want to find as characteristics of ideal vineyard land in the Finger Lakes.
And how many acres do you have?
The parcel we purchased is 120 acres. Not all of it can be planted with grapevines. So we currently have about 40 acres of vines planted. Fair amount of space is dedicated to this facility here where we do tastings. Small amount of space to our home and other equipment buildings. And eventually we'll have a production facility here as well. So then there are ravines and wooded areas that probably aren't suitable for grapevines.
And when did you plant your first vines?
So our first vines went in May of 2009. In 2008, when I first started, we prepared for that planting that year, that is in '08, by putting in a fair amount of drainage tile. You want to be able to do that before you do any planting. So our first vines went in 6 acres in 2009, another 6 acres in 2010, more in 13, more in 17, more in 19. About every 2 years, we are adding to our vineyard plantings, usually between 4 and 6 acres each time.
And can you describe the types of grapes that you planted?
There have been many, many varieties of grapes planted in this area over the years, back 150 years ago, really. The grapes I chose to plant were grapes that we felt we could really make great wine from and sell that wine from around the country, really. So I tried to pick varieties that we knew would do well in this climate and that were not all that well represented elsewhere in the United States. So the great wine growing regions in the United States, California, Oregon, Washington State, they tend to be focused on warmer climate grapes. These are cooler climate grapes we grow. That'd be Riesling primarily, also Gewürztraminer, and then on the red side, Cabernet Franc is a grape we think belongs best in this region.
And you mentioned drainage tiles. About how many linear feet did you have to install? A lot. It's tens of thousands of feet of underground drainage, which is needed if you want to keep your vineyard in an optimal condition. It draws water out of the soil and carries it away, so your vines have drier conditions to grow in. And it also helps keep the vineyard floor dry so that molds and mildew are less of a challenge particularly during the fall season. Right, and can you describe the significance of the name? Why did you choose Boundary Breaks?
So we picked Boundary Breaks after thinking about and looking at a lot of different names. The thing about picking a name for a winery you have to keep in mind is if you're going to sell your wine around the world, which is what we do, you need to pick a name that no one else in the world in the wine industry has chosen. So it's like any other business. You do a trademark search and you find that there are a lot of names out there that people have already taken. In our case, this region, which was formed topographically and geologically by glaciers, when they melted, they cut these deep gorges. These are breaks in the landscape, and we have one of those breaks at our northern boundary. We have one at our southern boundary, so those are the two breaks that are the definition of our boundaries, and thus we have boundary breaks.
Okay. And that also has impacted the types of soil that you have here, correct?
So definitely. So the glacial activity really pushes soil around quite a bit as those glaciers move, and you see a lot of variation in this area. In our case, the soils on this site are fairly uniform. They're silt loams. That's a combination of sand, of clay, and gravel, and some organic matter. So I would say we are able to expect the entire site to have uniform soil characteristics. Those characteristics are moisture retentive. That is, the water tends to remain in the soil. That's why we have put in all the drainage tile that we have to make sure it doesn't retain too much moisture.
And your wife has a history, a career background in plant science, correct?
She does. Diana spent 32 years teaching high school science. Among her subjects that she taught in high school science were earth science, botany, and plant science. So she is now able to apply all that background in a very direct way here in our vineyard.
And what about the startup? What is financially? What does a startup cost?
So we started in 2008, and we weren't really clear on just how much it would take to reach a point where you have a business that's self-sustaining. And typically it takes between 12 and 15 years of investment before your vineyard business begins to show a profit. That is, if you are including both your vineyard planting, that is, if you're an estate vineyard, so you're not buying grapes, you're actually growing them yourself. So it's a capital-intensive business. It means you have to think of it as a factory, unlike a crop farm where you can plant seeds, harvest that crop, and then start again the next year. The vines that we're planting are likely to last 50 to 60 years, and the investment in getting them established and getting them producing is a big one. And you also need to plant enough of them so that you have enough wine to sell to be able to cover your costs. And I think the one challenge these days is it is so expensive that it's very hard for young people who have not had some other source of capital to get started in this business. It's not just purchasing the land, it's purchasing the equipment to manage the vines and employing the staff to work with you. It's a big undertaking.
And what are some of the greatest stressors that you've had? This year has been difficult, I know.
This year's been difficult with the COVID issues, because all the restaurants that we sell our wine to have not been open, and so we haven't had to sell a lot of wine to places that we would normally sell wine to. I think it's patience, really. The thing to be mindful of is the great wine regions of the world really became that over many generations. They weren't all to what we see today as successful wine businesses. They weren't that way 100 years ago, most of them. And so I think the thing to maintain is a understanding that we will do this piece of it now, but it's not done yet by a long shot. It'll probably be, I don't think, it takes about 25 years for us to get from where we started to where I think we have, we're making 20 to 25,000 cases of wine. We're employing a professional staff, compensating them well. That's really the objective here, is to have a really successful business that's making great wine. It's employing great people, paying them a really fair wage so that they can, raise families and stay in the area. And that's a big task.
So economically, how many people do you employ year-round versus seasonal?
There are probably 30 people that we have at one time or another over the course of a year paid a weekly paycheck to. We have 10 people that work just for us full-time. But then we have a part-time staff of vineyard workers. We also have a part-time staff of hospitality or tasting room employees. So year-round, it's between 8 and 10 people. And then during the growing season and during the heavy tourist season, that's usually May to October, another 20 people who are part-time.
And what is your relationship with other producers in the area? I've heard very strong connections.
So the relationships with other producers are really quite constructive. They're positive, I think, because we're still an underdog in the world of wine. We're not on every wine list in every restaurant in America the way, say, California wines are, or say Oregon Pinot Noir, or French wines, or Italian wines, or Spanish. wine. So until we get to that point as a region, we have to pull together. And so far, we particularly here have benefited from advice and input from all kinds of other owners around here and other practitioners. We like each other, basically. You know, not everyone likes each other, but by and large, we get along pretty well.
Okay, and as far as growth, how many cases did you start out with when you first
So our first harvest was in 2011, and we made 850 cases. That was all Riesling at the time. And today we make about 10,000 cases. Of that 10,000, about 7,000 of them are Riesling.
Riesling.
And then the other 3,000 is a mixture of Gewürztraminer and Cabernet Franc, and a few other smaller varieties.
So the market is always changing. Do you feel the pressure from outside, from market tastes, or you?
So the biggest challenge we have is that everyone in the market thinks Riesling is a sweet wine, and so if they're accustomed to drinking dry wines from California, they look at a Riesling and they say, I don't like sweet wine, I won't pick that wine off the shelf. And that's a bias, or that's a misunderstanding that is just very widespread in the industry. And Riesling is the grape that grows well in this area. So this is what we do. It's, we have to contend with that perception in the market. It's changing. I think that younger folks today are a little bit more open to variation in what they choose to consume with a meal or by itself, whether it's craft beverages or craft beer or craft cocktails. So I don't know that the younger audience is quite as stuck on this notion that Riesling is only a sweet wine.
And what do you consider the greatest natural threat to the vineyard?
Well, the natural threats to the vineyards are mold and mildew. These are everyday concerns because of the way our climate is. It's not what you would call an arid, dry Mediterranean climate. And so here we are on a day when it's moist outside. Other threats to the industry are just the size of the wine business. There's so many wines out there. There's so many good wines. And the bigger companies are selling wine at $7, $8, $9 a bottle. We cannot make a living selling wine at $7 or $8, $9 a bottle. We don't have that scale. So it's very competitive. On the other hand, I think there are a lot of people who realize that buying $8 wine from a faceless conglomerate, isn't all that satisfying. These wines are not unique. They're really manufactured products. They're not artisanal products. And so we have the benefit of offering something that's a little bit more authentic and a little bit more distinctive than what you might otherwise find in a jug or a box of wine bought elsewhere. Now, those are all fine wines, but they're not necessarily distinctive wines.
Well, I think you just answered what was going to be my next question. What do you consider your greatest achievement in the industry?
I think being able to assemble a team of people and have them grow professionally from the early stages here. Our Case Staple, our vineyard manager, joined when he was, still pretty young. He's been with us now from the very beginning. We have a great tasting room staff. I think the achievement is finding people and keeping them engaged enough to help the growth of this business. We've grown. I think the other thing I would say is the wines have turned out to be better than I expected them to be. I didn't expect that we would have the wine critics, the trade, hold them in such high regard as early as they did. And I think that's not because I've done anything special. It's just that the Vineyard site and the work we do in the Vineyard has paid off, really. Good wine is made in the Vineyard, and I think the wines we've made are reflective of the Vineyard. So I can't say that's my achievement so much as to let the Vineyard do its thing.
And finally, what would you tell anybody interested in a career to open or begin a vineyard or winery?
I think you have to be doing it for the right reasons. I think owning a vineyard or life in a vineyard looks very, very attractive. You're outdoors. You're making a product that makes people happy. You're in nature, in a natural environment, and that's very attractive. It's a 7-day-a-week job. It's early in the morning till late at night. It's 365 days a year. You have to like the work. You have to like the physical part of the work. You have to like meeting people and engaging with your customers. People don't do it for the financial return. You need to do it because the activity is engaging and satisfying to you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Anything else you'd like to add?
I think the Finger Lakes is the best days of the Finger Lakes wine world are still ahead of us. We're making great wine every day. It's getting better every year. It's getting better. This is 2020. The 2020 vintage, I think, will go down as one of the great vintages in Finger Lakes history. And it will just allow our wines and their reputation to reach more people and for us to continue to grow. So, I think better days are ahead. Our best days are ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. Again, this is Bruce Murray of Boundary Breaks, and I am Monica Wilkinson-Kelly of the Edith B. Ford Memorial Library. Today is October 22nd, 2020, and I thank you for your time, Bruce.
Thanks, Monica. It's been a pleasure.